So the past couple of weeks has been relatively interesting. We have moved, and I now have a little bit of a bigger shop to work out of. At least I'm calling it a shop. But you can see that it's a total mess right now because basically everything in the move just kind of got dumped off in the middle of the shop, and I have not had a time to organize and clean it yet. But one thing that I noticed was there was no access to the attic, and wanting to inspect the attic, I pulled a little piece of wood that was screwed to the ceiling, luckily for me, because I hate working with nails when I don't have to. But I popped that panel out. So what I found was a nice empty attic and a lot of storage space in the center of these trusses. Now, you don't want to store a lot of weight in an attic like this because, quite simply, these trusses aren't designed to carry a lot of weight. I also found some insulation. As you can see, it's kind of double stacked through here. That's R30. And time we put a piece of plywood down here on the floor, we're going to lose some of that, but I think it's well worth the storage space that we're going to need. Now, the next big question that I had going through my mind this past week is where to stick an attic ladder. I certainly don't want to climb up a ladder to get into a hole every time I access storage up there. It needs to be relatively simple to get to. And I also thought that sticking it in between the center of these doors seems a little promising just in case I have a car in each bay, or I'm working on a project in one and a car in another. If the ladder came down in between the doors, that might actually make it a little more accessible. Unfortunately, the trusses, they do run this way, but one of the trusses almost pretty much in the center of the garage. So we'll have to offset it a little bit. I plan on using this bay to work on cars and vehicles, and this bay is going to be relatively empty, and it's basically going to be kind of like a workshop area to work on things. As you can see, I kind of started sorting and laying it out. So I think what we're going to do is pull a panel down here near the ceiling, and we're probably going to stick that ladder somewhere on this side of the center line, because that's how we're going to have to do it with the way the trusses are. Now that I've removed the piece of ceiling here that was obstructing our view of how the trusses run, you can clearly see that one truss runs right down the center of the garage. So the ladder is going to be on this side of the garage, and that's okay because this bay is going to be pretty much, for the most part, relatively empty. But it's still almost in the center, so I bet you could put a car in here and still get the ladder down. Not that that's important in this situation, but yeah, you never know. So now we're just going to kind of pull the batting out of the way and take a look at what we have, and then we'll get the instructions to the ladder and see what it takes to make this installation happen. Now, right off the bat, what I've noticed is there is a 2x4 right in my way. Now, they've done this to add a little bit of structure to the ceiling, and it keeps the bottoms of the trusses from being pushed and pulled left and right, as you can see with the motion of my hand. This particular garage also has wood screwed to the bottom, which would also prevent that. And in this case, we're just going to cut it out, and it'll be perfectly okay. Now, I do want to talk about the insulation up here. This is R30, and R30 is pretty thick, as you can see. It definitely exceeds the thickness of a 2x4 by a lot, and if we were to take a sheet of plywood and lay it down over the top, we're going to compress this insulation, and you will no longer get R30 value out of it. In fact, it'll be a lot less. Insulation works on the principle of airspace in between, and as you crush it down, you lose that airspace, and your insulation is compromised. So we are actually going to do one of two things to help a little bit. Firstly, this is not a heated garage. I do plan on using a little kerosene turbo heater or something to heat it up in the wintertime. However, it's not heated all the time, and efficiency is always important, but not as important because it's not a home, if any of that makes any sense at all. So we probably will take the 2x4s that are here and just match them up with other 2x4s. And what that's going to do is it's going to gain us a little bit of space, the height of the 2x4. It also means we don't have to deal with taking this out because it's nailed down. All we have to do is worry about the wiring, and if we're going to lay it on top, all we have to do is pull all the staples out and just lay the wiring in between the 2x4s. And that plywood will just sit on top of all these 2x4s. It also means another thing is we can space these a little closer laying long ways, and we can use a little bit thinner plywood, which means a little less weight in the attic, and you're always after not making too much weight up here because, again, it's not designed for storage, but you can get by with storing a little bit of stuff up here. And in my case, I have a lot of lightweight stuff that literally weighs hardly anything, but it takes a lot of space. So now I have just ran some 2x4s across the bottoms of the trusses here, long ways. They're 54 inches apart, which is what the instructions say. And then this is a temporary piece of wood that it says to put in there so that when you work the ladder up in here, you can rest it on this temporary ledge and it'll support it until you get it bolted and screwed in. I did the same thing to this side, and as fate would have it, my scrap wood pile didn't have one that would reach all the way across for the temporary support. No big deal. It's still going to snag at least most of the way. I suggest you probably do this right, unlike me, but in this case, we'll be okay. And I put another piece of wood up here as well to support it. And I unfastened the wires, and they're just laying loose there, and eventually I'm going to put them on that side of that 2x4, or relocate them somewhere else altogether. At this point, the entire attic ladder is simply resting on the two end pieces of wood, and the instructions tells you go ahead and open it. And if you take a look, you can see it's pretty well boxed in, and that's the point. So you can test this ladder out, make sure it opens and closes without any obstructions, and then you can go ahead and bolt it in. They provide you with the bolts as well. So we could just pull it down and test it out. So I've got all the shims in it, all the bolts and all the temporary screws. I'm going to pull these temporary boards off, and the very next step is to trim the ladder. So there's a chart in the instructions that tell you how much you trim off the bottom. I'm not going to get into that, just read the instructions. And I'm just going to take my body saw and chop these off where I've put the lines, and then they have some kind of fancy feet that you bolt over the top of that. So now that I've put the feet on the ladder and I've trimmed the bottom off, the ladder actually works really well. It's really stable, and as you can see, it looks really nice. All we have to do now is remove some of these end pieces here, the temporary supports. There's one on each end, and we're going to knock off the wedges, and pretty much that's about it. We'll put the pieces of wood back along the side and fix the insulation, and then we need to get up into the attic and start putting a floor down. I think what we're going to do is make part 2, because this video has actually gotten a little longer than I like to make them. So stick around, like and subscribe, and a new video will be coming out soon of the attic floor.